Good day to you. I am your host, Tasena Lynn McCurry, Executive Director and founder of Caribbean Heart Inc., who have the opportunity to hopefully summarize for you an experience I just recently had. I was at the AzusaNOW Leadership Summit held in St. Louis, Missouri. I apologize, it's been a lot of travel, but it was definitely in St. Louis, Missouri at the Gateway House of Prayer. First off, super congrats, job well done to all the brothers and sisters of such great heart and service that just helped us flow through the whole weekend professionally, administratively. It was fantastic, and I so thank you for pulling it together, helping it to run so smoothly. So I hope in this next 15-20 minutes to give you a good understanding of why I actually went to the event, some of the things that took place. And I know I'm going to leave out some life-changing experiences that happened, but I wanted to kind of give you an understanding because I have many friends and intercessors who were praying for me and were blessing and releasing gifts as we went forward. And I really wanted to be able to explain it well. So I decided, I feel like it was the best thing to do is do this video. So I need to give you a little background on Azusa Street, and I made some notes earlier today. So I will be referring back to them. I just want to start off with myself. So in 2012, I was introduced to God's Generals series. It's a DVD series. It's also a book. I actually have the book here. I took off the cover, but in it, it talked about God's generals. It talks about those early in the 1900s and beyond who did things in God's kingdom that actually reflect what Jesus used to do. For those that understand, throughout the New Testament, Jesus did healings. He did miracles. Dead people were raised. Yes. Blind eyes were open and deaf ears were open. And yet these generals that were talked about throughout this book, throughout this DVD series, repeat that. And so such individuals as John Alexander Dowie, Evan Roberts, Charles Parham, William Seymour, John G. Lake, Smith Wigglesworth, Catherine Coleman, William Branham, Jack Coe, and there's others that were in this series. And so in 2002, when it was introduced to me, just to give you the difference in time, we saw it on a VHS instead of DVD. Those that are old enough to understand, that's quite hilarious by itself. And it was introduced to me by Evangelist Delzora Poe, who was my mentor at the time in the prophetic and intercession in Philadelphia when I was located, where I'm originally from. It's important for me to just highlight something, that the reason why it really struck my attention. When I first watched the video, there weren't a lot of African Americans, except one, which I'll mention in a minute. But everybody there, despite their color of their skin, it was clear that they knew God and they were walking in something that I had not experienced in my church and other churches that I knew of. And one thing specifically, there was an individual named Smith Wigglesworth who stands out to me because his level of faith, one of the things he did was that he was having a church service, having a meeting, and there was a baby who was 2 years old who had never walked before, was crippled from birth. And he was sitting there talking to the parents, and he asked the parents to step back, and he put the baby on the floor. And he backs up, and he comes running, and he kicks the baby. The parents go bananas, and the baby starts to roll, jumps up on 2 feet, and takes off. And at that moment, and many moments like that, I said, what kind of faith did this person have? That he literally had the level of impact in the earth that Jesus did. And there's that verse that says we should do greater exploits than even those that know their God should do greater exploits. So I'm like, God, that means these men and women that were in this DVD series, they were doing things that I was able to do as a member of the body of Christ, as a believer in Jesus and his miracles, believer in the Old and the New Testament. So that stuck out to me. And I understood the difference with revival and healing. So sometimes they would have meetings where they didn't have the internet. A lot of them didn't have telephones. And so what happened was people would show up because someone said the power of God was being released. And healings in such a way where crippled were getting out of chairs. Hospitals were like, where are all the people? And so there were things that were happening. It was released revival. And that level of revival was happening where it wasn't just in the church. Down the street before you got to the church, you felt the presence of the Lord. Everything around those areas, there started to be change. And so I started to understand and experience and get a glimpse of one of the things that God had done in the earth. And so the only African American in the series, his name was William Seymour. and he is was a man of prayer, and there's much about who he was, but I'm highlighting some key points. He was originally, I think, from Houston, and he was located in California, but he was a leader with the Azusa Street revival. And again, there's history that I encourage you to study. But one of the key things about Azusa Street was that the testimonies that I remember reading were when people were going and their limbs were broken, they would lift their limbs up in the presence of the Lord. So the presence of the Lord was so thick, it was like a tangible cloud. It was a visible cloud. And you would lift your hand up there, and arms were going back, and limbs were going back, and blind eyes were opening, and deaf ears were opening, and people who had tumors on their neck, tumors were falling off. And they were like, people at the altar were tumor workers. Like, they were picking up the remnants of because the miracles had gone on. And I pray that I'm doing justice to these examples, that it can inspire. But what was happening for me as one who was in the faith since I was 10 years old, so and at this point I was in my early 20s when I was experiencing this. I was so encouraged. Like, this was happening. I knew people were doing this after Jesus had walked the earth, but I had no idea that it was still happening in 1990s and 2000s and even today. So from the Azusa Street, many branches of Christianity went out, and different levels of just worship, and that expression of worship where all different races were coming together. So times where black and white were praying separately and worshiping separately. These types of revivals were bringing healing deep in the heart from racism, offense, hurt, across poverty lines, and really bringing the body of the Christ together as one. And it was something that I think the Lord was proud of. So that was 2002 for me, and then it brought me to 2010. So I had studied a little bit more about the revivalists, Smith Wigglesworth, Catherine Coleman. I watched DVDs. I watched John G. Lake. I mean, one time there was a testimony that John G. Lake had brought. He healed a horse. So I was like, why would he need to heal the horse? The horse fell out on the ground, but he was carrying people, and they needed that horse for livelihood. And so it was important to that family. Therefore, it was important to God. It was important to the family. He laid hands on the horse, and the horse got up. Again, study these things for yourself. But from what I'm learning and observing, I was so grateful to learn that there were more miracles that have been happening. 2010, I was on staff at the International House of Prayer in Atlanta, and where I served as an intercessory missionary. And during that time, and a revival or awakening and renewal, different terminologies, where the presence of the Lord was sitting so common, was so evident that manifestations of miracles were happening continuously. I personally know of individuals who had chronic conditions for a long time and were healed. Men and women who came to the event with glasses on and never needed to wear them again. And there are all sorts of different levels of great depression and other mental health conditions that these individuals were healed from. But I personally had an encounter. So in 2001, my mother won her battle with colon cancer, went home to be with the Lord. And though after that, I was in pulpits, I was talking to individuals, I was growing intercession, I had a dislike growing in my heart towards the Lord that I didn't realize. And it had gotten to the point that whenever things really hit the fan and were really bad, it would go all the way back to, but God, you allowed this woman who believed you and served you to suffer painfully and then die. And though she knew you, so she's resting with you, I'm completely sure of that. Anytime things really get upset for me, I would go back to that level of hurt. And I didn't realize that hurt had developed to a reservoir of hate that I had in my heart towards God. During this revival, this awakening services that were held at IHOP in Lynn in that season, I was completely healed and delivered from that level of hate that was in my heart. I never again got that level of anger, ever again. So I knew personally that this kind of presence would heal the depths of heart, heal mind, heal physical body. So I was like, okay, this thing that I noticed with these videos in 2002 was alive in 2010. And so I was like, wait a minute, there's more things going on here. So I'm reading through my notes. I took these earlier because I was trying to make sure this video was in 15-20 minute time frame. So it's something that I always wanted. I'm called to the nations as an intercessor, and I do development in the Caribbean. There's different things the Lord has gifted me in, and so So when I go to the nations, I not only want to go to do public health services and do education and things, but I want to see transformation. I had the opportunity to um, look at the George Otis Jr. DVDs and actually met him moons ago. He probably would not remember, but I met him with Evangelist Del Sorpo, whose last name is Terrell at this time, in Philadelphia, because he had come. And so there was transformation all around me, which comes with the power of the Holy Spirit, that I just didn't put all together until time went on. So in 2016, which is now, I began to make decrees, because this is the year of Jubilee, for those that know, according to the Hebraic calendar. Every 7 years, on the seventh year, you would have your debts canceled and land be restored. And so many miracles. You can read it in Leviticus, I think it's 27, 37, 37, I think it's 27. But after the 7 times 7, you enter into the 50th year, which began in September 2015 and will go all the way through October 2016. So we're in this time now. Is that, excuse me, you can expect more from God, because there's a greater level of movement that is happening. So I was like, I'm going to write my 7 decrees for this year. Every goal that I decreed for 2016 was going to come to pass. I wanted to make sure that I had the faith to stand up on it and to release certain things into this year. So it was on the first Friday, the first prophetic night. I'm a ministry training college student at Christian International Vision Church